Hello, everyone, and welcome to another broadcast of Speaker Circle. This evening, I am so honored to have with me the Director of Student Organizational Development and Management at University of Massachusetts Amherst, Miss Lydia Washington.
Hello, hi everyone. Hi, this is Ashley. How are you doing?
Thank you. And just in full disclosure, not only is Lydia a brilliant director and she helps a lot of students daily. I mean, you've been in the industry almost 20 years, I want to say, working with students.
About 15.
You're not old enough to be there. Almost. I mean, because you've done it even when you were an undergrad, you worked with students, helping them. So you're an expert. But Lydia is also very dear to my heart. She's my sister and I love her. And I'm so grateful for you to come here and share your time and your talents. Thank you again. Now, today's topic is one that I'm so excited about because we are going to talk about how to use the 6 blocks of dialogue to effectively communicate with all generations.
Yeah.
If you're like most of us out there, no person is an island. So you have people who are younger than you, your peer group, as well as people that are older than you.
Yeah.
So Lydia, share with us a little bit about what 6 blocks of dialogue and how did you get so engaged in this?
Cool. So I love working with students. I was a student leader. I felt like I never forget when I talked to some of my mentors at the great University of Florida, Go Gators. I was interested in going into higher ed. And so one of the things that have been very helpful for me, currently I'm a educational specialist student in the social justice program at UMass Amherst. So not only do I work full time, but I'm also in school. And the wonderful social justice program, which I love, shout out to my advisor, Jimena Sumida, introduced me and some of our colleagues to some of the research where they talk about the 6 blocks of dialogue. I felt like once I learned about these 6 blocks of dialogue, I felt like it just changed my whole life. And so one of the reasons why I'm excited to be on this platform today is because I want to share something that is so important to me that seems so taboo, but also hard at the same time. The 6 blocks of dialogue, which I believe has been so helpful for me. And I want to be honest with you all. I'm all about equations when it comes to life. If it doesn't add up, it doesn't make sense. And so one of the equations that I feel like I've made up, right, is about when you take emotional intelligence and the 6 blocks of dialogue, I'm telling you, it will equal like some type of commonality. And so as you all see on the screen, this equation that I came up with, which is EQ plus 6B, is what I'm going to be talking about today. So I'm going to focus on the 6B. The 6B are the 6 blocks of dialogue. The first one would be deep listening. Deep listening is something that a lot of people say, yeah, I'm listening to you. You ever been in a relationship and your partner is like, yeah, I heard you, but they didn't really hear you? Yeah, that's an example of them not really having really great deep listening.
Now, I want to ask you, Lydia, how can you tell if someone is really deeply listening to you? What are some of the signs that you know that they're tuned in?
Yes, that's a great question, Lisa. I think how you can tell is when you're actually figuring out the outcome of the conversation. So it's not about being like, well, did you hear what I said? Like, no, it's about what did you understand our conversation to be? And if they're able to understand is not to agree, but to understand your positioning, to me, that's the first sign of deep listening. They may not agree with what you have mentioned or what you said, but they understand the impact or they understand where you're coming from would be the first and probably given sign that you would know that someone's actually deeply listening to you.
Love it. Love it. So Continue on the 6 blocks of dialogue. So deep listening is the first one. What's the next one?
Suspending judgment. So for those who are out there, y'all know your girl. Like before I learned these blocks, I'm a Cancer. I believe in horoscopes. I'm a feeler, right? So I would go into meetings or I would have different relationships with people and I'm like, yo, I don't like their energy or their energy's telling me otherwise. And I realized that was pretty problematic and very toxic. So with the 6 blocks of dialogue, I've learned, which has helped me not be as stressed out, to ask questions of clarity, is that I have to suspend my judgment. And that was a very hard one. I remember sitting in that class saying like, oh my gosh, I have to like not go off my feeling. I have to at least give people a chance. And so that's a big one for me. I think that's the hardest one for most human beings, especially now during this time. Suspending our judgment is so hard to do when you're having a dialogue across different generations. And how this is effective when it comes to different generations is that, with you knowing, like, if you have to work for a baby boomer, if you have to work for a Gen X person, or maybe you're a Gen Zer, it's important to suspend your judgment, because as much as generations are, these like generational notions such as millennials and baby boomers are something that we use to identify. It doesn't define who we are, but it does help us understand culture and the environment that shapes us who we are today.
I cannot agree with you more, Lydia. And even in my time in corporate America, you could have one situation and people from different generations interpret it so differently. Now, you working with college students, I can imagine that
all the time.
Absolutely. So suspending judgment is great. And that's something that you can use in your professional as well as your personal lives too. So I love that.
The next one is identifying assumptions. Yes, all of us do it, especially in relationships, when that person doesn't call you back, or you don't know where you're at, or even with like when you have a new boss, you're trying to learn like their new leadership style. It's very good to ask clarifying questions, because when you make assumptions, you already know, you all know the saying, you make a of yourself. And I really firmly believe that. So I think is you not only need to not make them, but you need to identify them once they are actually going through your brain process, or when you're trying to communicate with folks.
Now, I want to ask, because that's interesting, because how do you know if you're making an assumption, or most people feel like they have enough data to say, okay, this is not an assumption, this is a fact. So is there a way to tell, okay, you really have assumed this and not necessarily got the facts you need?
So that's the thing. How is it a fact? Is it your fact, or is it their fact? So I think one of the things that's important is that you would need to, until that person has said that to you, then it's not. I think a lot of people are, hey, I'm seeing all the signs. This is how I'm feeling. Okay, then ask the question so that person is able to communicate that with you. And the goal is that they will do that. But I've always been very firm that until that person's able to actually, it doesn't become fact until both parties, in my opinion, understand.
That is so powerful, because we do sometimes our assumptions become our own facts. But to your point, if the person hasn't confirmed or said that to you, it's just an assumption. So
you shouldn't always wait for them. Sometimes you need to initiate, especially if it's bothering you in that aspect. But you have to have them confirm or clarify.
I love that. I love that.
And they'll have the expectation they're going to be honest with you, but at least you tried.
That's all that matters, right?
Yes.
So next on the 6 blogs of dialogue, these are great, by the way, Lydia.
Thank you. And then the next one would be reflection and inquiry. That is very important, because sometimes you need time to internally like understand how you're communicating and what is being communicated. So like, I'll give you a prime example. I keep talking about relationships. I don't know why, but most people kind of connect with that a little bit more than the workplace, ironically, in my experience. So when you're in a relationship, for instance, and someone makes a comment, sometimes you have to be reflective. And so sometimes in communication, it's important to understand the times and period where both parties are able to come in to be reflective, and to have that type of like inquiry when it comes to communication. Even for your boss, for instance, your boss might be like a delegator and need something within 24 hours, and you got to get it to them, right? And so for you, of course, it's your job, so you have to do it, and you have to make sure you meet to those demands. But if you're having a conversation with your boss, for instance, be very reflective and understand the inquiry of like, well, why is this happening? Understanding like, is this something that is beyond everybody's control and we have to get it done? And so like sometimes we don't take the time to reflect and understand the inquiry before we make any type of like judgments or issues with communication.
I love that. And you really broke it down so practical, because we automatically jump to the assumption instead of reflecting on it. And then when you reflect on it, you can look at the bird's eye view of why the person is asking you to do that. That's powerful, Lydia. Powerful.
And then the last one, which is one of my favorites, is respect. Generationally, that is, and we can talk about that, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is so imperative to understand because for a baby boomer, right, respect means do as I told, do as I say. If I say something, it is what it is, no questions answered. Some of us have lived through, some of our parents or our grandparents who had that, but maybe for like a millennial or a Gen Zer, it's like respect is collaborative. It's we both should need to be a part of that. If you say something, I want you to understand the impact. So when you're working with different generations, this goes back to the blocks. You got to not make your assumptions and understand where someone and have your inquiry, right? To understand where that person's coming from. And then you have to kind of like to define what does respect mean to you? Because like for someone, I don't like to say the word older, but when you are wiser, right? You lived on earth for like 40, 50 years, you come to a point where I don't have to explain myself to you. What I say, it is what it is, right? Right?
Oh yeah, we know that.
But for some people, it's like, no, that's not good enough. Like, I need to understand why you're making those decisions. And so when you're in the workplace, which I know a lot of people are on here tonight to understand that, it is good to have expectations on when you fight your battles with that type of conversation. Because sometimes it is what it is, and sometimes you might have the understanding that you could have a place to talk about why this has impact or understanding why you have to do what you do.
That's really great. And I was talking to a friend of mine and we were discussing having our parents most of our parents are baby boomers. And, they tell you, I've lived this world, I know. And especially when you're an adult now, your parents still may look at you as a child. But one thing that we discussed was sharing frame of reference, like saying to someone, hey, I understand how you feel. I had this experience, and actually giving a real-time example.
Yes.
So I thought that would be a good way to take people off their defense.
Yes.
No, you're not disrespecting them because you're asking clarifying questions. Because for some generations, and you and I grew up with the same family, and children were to be seen and not heard. You don't question what they tell you. Why? Because I said so. That's it.
There's no way our grandmother would have. Rest in peace, Thelma. Love you, sis. But there's no way we could have been like, hey, why am I washing these clothes? Why am I? No, it would have been like, problems, right? Yeah. And so it's interesting, like when you think about the generational differences, then, granted, I don't have any kids, but I've seen you do an excellent job with your son, Anderson, and how like you're able to talk to him and let him understand, accountability and help him understand, like, when I'm asking you to do this, this is why, because that's important for his development to understand. And so I think that it's interesting because in parenting or even in marriages or even in friendships and family ships, right? We take on some of those things that were taught for us, but we don't evaluate or do any like reflection on, does this really work for this person or during this time? Or helping them to understand. And one of the things that we need to be very like understanding about is that even with COVID-19, right? COVID-19 is probably not going anywhere anytime soon. So technology will be the hugest component of how we communicate, how we engage. And so that's why it's important to understand these blocks, right? And moving towards, emotional intelligence, right? The next part is to understand that as an equation, because you'll be able to find some type of common ground. If you look at the equation, I put a question mark because some people come to my speeches and they talk to me about this, like, Lydia, I need an answer. Like, we're not vibing or I'm not understanding my boss. And I'm like, you know why? There is no answer. These are guidelines that help you understand to a common ground. And so when you talk about emotional intelligence, everybody knows. I wish I would have known this term when I was younger for my both personal and workplace, because for some people who do know me when I first got into the profession, I was a firecracker. I would go in there, let students know, like, I'm the big dun dada. You're going to listen to me. And
you, baby Lydia, not you.
Yeah, I was a little bossy. Some people kind of, a little here and there. And I realized that I didn't have the maturity, right? Emotional maturity to, in my opinion, the emotional maturity to navigate those waters, right? And
Wow.
so when you think about emotional intelligence, I'm going to go through it really quickly because most people have heard it. You have to have self-awareness, you have to have self-regulation, you have to have motivation, empathy, and social skills. And I want to talk about the two that I know I had struggled with for a long time. I'm doing much better, I'm almost 40 and I'm in a better space. But self-awareness is big. A lot of people have issues with each other because they don't have the self-confidence of who they are, and they're not understanding the self the things that make them feel those like they don't have the confidence. So if you work for somebody, I mean, this is just my opinion. If you work for somebody who's always trying to show their dominance, as you know, what some people talk about, like with short people, because I'm short, the Napoleon complex, right? Which I don't believe at all, but like that's another topic, right? I think what ends up happening is that you try to superset it with something else because you don't have confidence in that. So a part of the emotional intelligence or the maturity is understanding that you need to be self-aware about those areas so that it doesn't show up in different areas and people people think you're crazy or a lunatic. Another part that in the workplace that when you think about the different generations, right, is empathy. And let me tell you about empathy, right? Empathy is so different because in different generations. So you always hear about, well, back in my day, I didn't have a computer. And back in my day, I had to go to the library and read 10,000 books to write a paper. Y'all have Google and y'all have that. Well, okay, they got Google. They got that. Still have empathy that they're still navigating through a system or an area that they don't really know. And so when you talk about the workplace, right, you have to have empathy because there's different generations. I am a millennial. I am proud. I have a lot of mentors who are Gen Xers. And when I tell you I've learned so much from them and they have learned so much from me, it has been remarkable because we've been able to find a common ground, right? But I always make the joke like, well, I don't mean to be the millennial in the group, but whatever y'all just said doesn't make any sense for millennials. Right? And they're like,
you have to bring that perspective, though. It's so important.
Yeah, and so because we have a really cool relationship, they'll be like, Lydia, help me to understand, right? And so and working with some of my mentors, they, help me understand, like sometimes these things just have to get done, or, you have to do it and not ask for guidance and use and be confident, right? To use your expertise to get those things done. So shout out to one of my biggest mentors, Gen Xers. I don't know if she's watching online, Mrs. Inku Galai. She was amazing for me because she was one of my direct supervisors. And I'm not going to lie to you, there were moments where we didn't understand or connect, but because of the empathy we had for each other, the self-awareness, the suspension of, of judgment, and also actually having respect for each other, we made it work. And so that's why I believe this particular equation, yes, it won't give you the exact answer, but it will get you to some common ground of understanding. And there were times where there was decisions that needed to be made where I just had to understand the decision. And there were times where I was able to be a part of the decision. And I was okay with that because there was that type of, conversation. So that's pretty much, the aspects that I wanted to tell the world today. And Lisa for putting this platform for me. Please, people, Lisa has speaker series, speaker circles every week. You should also tune in. There's all types of topics, but I really wanted to do this because I have found this to be so eye-opening for me. For my relationships, I would say that, especially when it comes to relationships with family and friends, I'm really great on those relationships. I think that I may have informally did all these things, but once I learned about these things, I've been very intentional about that. And I think there was one of the things I wanted to talk about. Like, a lot of people know me and Lisa, you pretty much, we're two peas in the pod, but we're 6 years apart. And so our relationship, as she always calls me baby sis or little sister. One of my long mentors, looked up to her for guidance and help. And I think in our relationship, right, over the years, we have had roadblocks, right? And imagine if you and I both knew these things when we were younger, right, or had access to right, to these things. It probably would have saved us a lot of interesting arguments, right? But I think that it has been helpful for our relationship
Absolutely.
as in, being fully transparent. We had like a little turmoil like about a year or two ago, but it took like that dialogue to suspend judgment. And even that, not to like air out dirty laundry, but like there was times when we would talk and I'd be like, hey, Lisa, I need you to listen. Or like, can you, right now, I think there's a judgment. Or you'd be like, hey, Lydia, like, I need you to suspend that judgment because I need you to, and we had to literally say these words in order to get to a common understanding. So I know this equation is good for your workplace. I know it's good for your relationships. I know it's good for your family relationships, because when you're able to do this, you get to a better place. And sometimes I want to put this disclaimer out there too. You may get to understanding to disagree, and people have to understand if whatever the disagreement is or the miscommunication is, sometimes you have to walk away from it. So I don't want people to think that this equation equals you to get things back lovey-dovey. This equation might be an eye-opener, like, hey, the synergy is not there anymore, or this relationship doesn't work, or I might need to be looking for a new job.
And I love to say growth is uncomfortable. It is really uncomfortable. And I love to talk about personal equity. And there are times in life, when you think about even equity in your house or whatever, when you have that stuff built up, it's worth pushing through. I want to put a comment up from Kelly. Hey, Kelly, thanks everybody. First, the comments have been amazing, but I thought this was really good. She said, when we are listening, we need to take self out of the discussion and focus on what the other person needs. If we are too busy thinking about what someone else is telling us, the impact, that we aren't listening. That is so true. And she just gave me a little correction on there. Thank you so much. But I think that's the problem. The empathy part, you're right, when we're talking about emotional intelligence, really listening to the world through someone else's ears and hearing it. And I know I've been guilty of it because I am a Gen Xer. So people really give millennials and Gen Z
a bad rap.
And I think that it's so ignorant on Gen X and baby boomers to downplay their contributions. And a lot of time it's because baby boomers are the parents to a lot of the millennials and the Gen Xers. So they just feel like, how is my child going to teach me something? But I'm telling you, it's changed my life, learning from you, learning from other people. A lot of the people that work with me on my branding and they're phenomenal, and they're all millennials or Gen Xers. So I think it's important for us. We talk about cultural competency. Your generation is your culture as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then I know you have younger brothers. So even with that community.
That's another, with having two younger brothers, definitely gender plays a part in it as well. And so learning how to cross communicate, especially for Black men, when they are sometimes silenced for, showing their emotions or expressing their emotions, then they just don't express it, right? And so as the older sister, I have always been, as you know, because you've been there with me, the mediator when it comes to expressing how people feel and stuff like that. But I also think that it's important to understand that, a lot of these practices or these things that people are doing, whether it be in relationships or at works, it's learned by their environment, and it works for them, right? If you have a boss that has always been successful being like a dictator or delegating and not really engaging in ways of empathy, and they've been successful in it, they're going to continue to do that, And so sometimes it's important for people to understand that people's success, how it's being defined, could be because of their environment and how their environment has allowed them to be successful. And so where there's conflict is when you're dealing with a person or an employee or a partner, right? Where it's like, that doesn't work for me. My environment didn't allow me to do that. Or my environment told me that we should have a conversation or you should have empathy. And so it's hard, to find those things. But I think when you have an outcome, right? When you think about like SMART goals, like people think about SMART goals very work related. I would think about it in communication. What is your when you're having a conflict with somebody, you got an issue with somebody, you do have to self-reflect and figure out, why are you even having a conversation about it? What is the outcome? You know, people, and you know, I get kind of petty Betty sometimes when there's issues. I'd be like, so what's the issue? You know, because if you can't tell me the issue, then I don't need to have this conversation. I've learned to have a little bit more empathy for people, because sometimes it's not about me, it's about them. But like, I'm always about, I'm a straight shooter. Let me know what that is in that aspect. I have had a lot more empathy, because sometimes people just need to talk.
And they want to vent. And some people don't want you to give them a solution while you're communicating. And that's another part. There's been some great comments, but everyone's communication style is not the same. Like some of the comments. And you may just need to be an encouraging ear. Like, oh, listening is a secret to discover great stories. It's so true.
Yes. No.
It's so true.
Yeah. No, I think it's so important. It's funny that we got a shout out from Auntie Gail, because like, and hopefully Hannah doesn't kill me, but like, everyone knows I have one of my best friends for about 24 something years. And when we go at it, we go at it. Like, it's a family affair. People probably bring us together, like, what's going on. I remember one time, her grandmother also told me, like, you know, that's your best friend, and you make sure you communicate with her and you pray to Jehovah, you know, because your friendship is real. And so out of 24 years, you know, we've had our issues, as you've known as well too. But I think just recently, these building blocks of dialogue has helped me to be like, hey, Hannah, like, you know, sometimes I don't want you to solicit your opinion. And she, you know, she caught a feeling, but like, it was helpful, because now in our relationship, when we talk about certain stuff, right, she's like, can I solicit my opinion? And I'm like, I sit there and I'm like, yeah, you can give me your opinion. Or maybe it's something, a topic we're talking about where I'm like, you know, I don't want that. And we're okay with that. And I say this real life story because if anybody knows my best friend, you know, she's amazing, and she will tell you like it is and does not sugarcoat it. Shout out to Sandra, right? For that part. And I think that in my friendship with her for so many years, I did the same thing, but I was not comfortable of receiving it. And so when we talk about self-awareness, that was hard for me, you know. I had to start doing self-reflection, like, why am I not comfortable of someone who loves me to tell me the honest truth? You know, why am I not comfortable with that? And I have to start thinking about that so that I can have conversations and meet a common ground with that. And so I only use that example because it saved our relationship. You know, we're both stubborn. You remember the last argument we had? We were about to be like deuces, 24 years. I'll see you when I see you. But our families are so intertwined, so it would have been a little bit hard. But like, it goes back to the notion that you mentioned about personal equity, which I think is such an amazing topic, which I hope you do a speaker circle about that and more in depth, because I think people need to understand you have to think about the personal equity that you have with a person if it's even worth the conversation. And I only say that because one of my other best friends, not to put too much of my business out there, right? There has been times where, you know, when you're in all different types of relationships that you like, you know, try to figure out like what's going on with you and that person, X, Y, and Z. And I always used to be the type of person like, I need closure. So if this guy had hurt my heart or he did something wrong to me, I'm like, I need to go to him and close it. And I'll never forget her. Shout out to Stephanie Campbell. She mentioned sometimes you don't have to have closure with the other person. You have to have closure within yourself. And so, I think about that when you talk about personal equity, right? When it comes to dialogue across differences with generations, what is the personal equity with that person? You know, is this your boss, or is this your husband, or is this your partner, and this is somebody that means something to you? Then okay, then let's engage into these activities to save it. But if this is somebody who you're like, you know, I don't really have that much personal equity, I'm not really tied to this, and there's no outcome for this, then I have to close this myself. And so I give these real life examples because I'm in it. You know, I'm an expert, but I'm in it. I have moments where I be like going nuts and going crazy, like I don't know what this is and stuff like that. But I think the authenticness of me being authentic and like telling you all that I'm in it, but there's ways for us to navigate it, we'll be fine.
Absolutely. And there's been some great comments. Liza, which is one of my longtime friends, we've been friends since we were in middle school, I guess, but she was saying that she loves your vulnerability, and that's what it takes. And I say often, the relationships that you have the most contention and you're willing to be uncomfortable, being silent and ignoring people is easy. Cutting people off is easy. When you really face whatever the issue is at hand and you look in the mirror, that's how you become an effective communicator. And I tell everyone, communication is like going out to the gym. You're not going to get the body or the results you want if you're not putting in the work. And it's the same thing with your relationships. If you're not being vulnerable and communicating and not only just listening to understand, but also speak to be understood and ask the clarifying questions, then you're not going to get better at it. So.
And it's interesting you say that. One of my major points, if everybody can listen to us right now, there's one point that I want you to understand. And I think it's something that I know I'm going through in my life currently right now. People don't say this, to have effective communication, I'm going to say this again, to have effective communication, you have to be ready to be vulnerable. And when you are ready to be vulnerable, you have to look at what does it mean to be vulnerable, and what does vulnerability look like when you're communicating? And so I think that's the scary part. That's the elephant in the room. You have probably been to several workshops where they break down communication and how this is what you got to do and use I statements, all that ooh blah mess. Yeah. Right? But the part that people do not talk about, right, is the vulnerability that it takes in order to communicate. And that's where the personal equity comes in. That's when it comes to the self-reflections and understanding, like, what is the outcome of actually talking or communicating what those issues are or what you feel. And so I just want to make sure that if there's one thing you can learn tonight, everybody, is that you have to be vulnerable. And sometimes being vulnerable, you may not get the results that you want, right? But you have to praise yourself and honor yourself, right? To do that. And I want to give a shout out, I don't know if she's on here, to my therapist, Jocelyn, you're amazing, has helped me out this whole year to understand what that means, especially how it's connected to self-awareness and self-confidence. So
that is powerful. Well, Lydia, I tell you, I cannot thank you enough. I'm so proud of you. Personally, I love and adore you so much, but professionally, I've just really loved and I've grown from and learned so much about this. Thank you again for sharing the 6 blocks of dialogue. I mean, all very powerful. For those of you just joining us, please go back and watch this replay. It'll be on YouTube. And thank you to all of our participants. We had so many great comments in the chat box. Everyone was really engaged. And this is something we all need. It doesn't matter where you are in your life, what space, you have to communicate. And being able to communicate effectively is the way to go. So thank you again, Lydia. Thank you to everyone who listened to us and shared. Continue to tune in every Tuesday for Speaker Circle. Let's grow together. We really want to become the best versions of ourselves.
Yes. And thank you everyone for coming in today. Thank you, Lisa, for giving this platform for me. Shout out to all my friends, sorority sisters, family, friends, loved ones, co-workers. I am so blessed to have your support. I ask of you if you all can make sure you all still come to Speaker Circles on Tuesday, because I know they're gonna, Lisa does an amazing job with different, topics. And yes, if you need me to come, speak at any of your virtual circles, definitely find me on social media. I don't charge too much. I might come for free. Who knows? I just think this is an amazing opportunity for people to just, with the times that we're in, as you see what's happening with Black Lives Matter, with just our nation and our current, whatever you want to call the president. I'm going to say that out loud because that's how I feel. I'm feeling froggy about that. I think it's important to understand that if we're able to work on such as this equation, I feel like we would get to a better common ground of understanding.
I agree. Having that open dialogue. Now, as we close, I'm not going to be petty, but somebody put a little shout out to you on the chat. For those who don't know, we are all in the Greek love, but I'm an A, Lydia's a Delta, but I still put your little. It's all good, but that's what it's all about. And thank you again. Thank you all. I know this has been such. We'll have to do it part 2 because there's so much about this that we can really share. Thank you again, everyone, for tuning into Speaker Circle. Let's grow together and have an amazing day.